mathematics and building community. In fact, over the past 5 years, Carrie has secured National Science Foundation grants totaling around $6 million. And this speaks volumes about the relevance of her work. Carrie has also been quite active in areas of service and or outreach, the focus of her talk today. Among other activities, she's quite active with SACNAS, the Society of the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. She was also, I found this interesting, she's also the lead project manager of the Math Mamas project, a resource for women in mathematics who are also mothers. She'll be giving another talk tomorrow evening in the Egan Lecture Hall about the interdisciplinary relationships through data science, and it's part of the talk is going to be about a course that she teaches at Bates College called Calling Bull. It has to do with reading the newspaper and making sure that what you're reading is not bull. As is usual at the evening at Egan Talks, there'll be time for questions at the end of her talk. So as Angie mentioned, hold your questions till the end. And so please join me in giving a warm Juno welcome to Dr. Carrie Diaz Eaton.
I'm going to go to the side a little because I'm a little too short. You won't see me. Okay. So I apologize in advance for that. Thank you very much for having me. Apparently there's a step stool for the occasion. Look at that. Okay. Thank you for anticipating the vertically challenged. Thank you to the University of Alaska Southeast, the Egan Lecture Series, the biology departments, the math departments, all of the conversations I've had. I very much appreciate the invitation and the hospitality while I've been here, and the gorgeous weather and beautiful views. I know you also ordered those for me. I also, while I'm here, want to specifically acknowledge the many Native tribes here, such as the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian, whose lands we occupy here today, and to honor their ancestral connection to the land that has so moved my time here, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about advances in STEM education, but I want to do that in the context of community. One of the things that I did before I came here is I had a chat with my colleagues and talked to them about what they wanted to hear and about what kinds of things, why me? Why me, why now, why here? And I think that there was something about community that was speaking to them and potentially to the challenges that we all are asked to face moving forward. And so every time I talk about something that I'm interested, I want to bring in a community aspect and also talk about the communities that are important in making that work happen and moving it forward. So I'm going to talk about three communities, QUBES, EDSON, and Math Mamas, which was mentioned by Chris. And then I want to talk a little bit about some individual actions or things that I've been doing that either prompted the creation of those communities or things I've been able to do because those communities exist. And so maybe 3 whole different mini talks within one talk is a little much, but I'll do my best, and I apologize if I talk quickly like a New Englander. Okay, so I thank you for the gracious introduction. I probably don't need to do much more myself. I think he gave you Chris gave you a flavor of my interdisciplinary background. I started undergraduate as a zoology major because I wanted to solve the problems of nature and collapse of biodiversity and all sorts of things, and I ended up in mathematics, and I did that in part because actually the community in the math department at the University of Maine Orono was 100% supportive to me as an individual. That was really, really important, and really why I ended up choosing that over staying in zoology. But I've maintained my connections to zoology, and I've since dabbled in many places at the interface. And I'm a mathematician now that has never been in a math department since. So I've been in a biology department. I am now in a digital and computational studies department. What does that mean to me? What does being interdisciplinary mean? Part of it is a way for me to live in many different worlds at once, to be both engaged in biology research, interesting questions there, to be engaged as a member of the mathematics community, to contribute to solving wicked problems, wicked being a technical term here, wicked problems of today that really baffle us and challenge us as humans. It's also survival in a small college environment, and for those of you who are experienced in small colleges, while large colleges often ask you to be experts, deep experts in one thing, small colleges tend to call on you to do many different things. And so it's a survival mechanism, but also this sense of interdisciplinarity has helped me talk better across boundaries, across groups of people. And I was fortunate to hear somebody describe this at a recent conference. He talked about boundary spanners or boundary warriors, those of us at the boundary that seek to communicate and bring harmony with others. So what do these communities feel like when you find the right one? What does that level of support feel like? I'm going to bring beer up as an example, which is the conference community that Chris and I met at. And I remember my first time going there. And I was this faculty member at this really small college, and I was like, wow, there's other people that do things like me, that have weird combined interests like the way I do, and wow, that's so cool. And they're all interested, not just in math and biology, but also in the education parts. Like, that's still considered as much a part of what you do as a teacher than just the research. And they talk to me, they're nice. Like, not all of these conferences, like, people talk to the underlings, if you know what I mean. And they want to collaborate, and they play soccer. Like, I know that sounds silly, but it's a little cultural thing, right? Like, in Latinx, apparently Mike said he's like the only Latinx that grew up in his neighborhood that did not play soccer. Well, okay, like, I grew up in Latino that I play soccer, like 3 seasons out of the year. And so I just thought this was like the best conference ever. Let me give you another take. What else does the right community feel like? I mean, sometimes it's about being surrounded by the people that look like you, the people that have the same ambitions as you, the people who know the same challenges you have. And so this is like where Mike Navarro and I met. We met in DC at a leadership institute for the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. And that's what our science community, that felt right. So let me talk about challenge number one. Challenge number one, I was hired into a small environmental college called Unity College back in 2010. And right about the same time, there were foundational reports coming out across all of the biology societies saying this is what we need to handle the future of biology moving forward. Here's a list of all the things our students need to know. And that list, and there's been many reports over the years, but this one was the one fresh, hot off the press. That list, ability to apply the process of science, use quantitative reasoning, modeling and simulation, interdisciplinarity, communication and collaboration, and understanding the relationship between science and society. Those are high demands, and it's not easy. And many of these had to do with bringing the worlds of math and biology together in ways that maybe they hadn't been as well connected prior. And so at this point, I was not just dealing with this in my own institutional context, but also starting to visit a lot of conferences and education committees within conferences, and everybody was talking about the same set of problems, the same reports, and how are we going to make this happen? And we're just a small committee in a big professional society, and everybody in the same group is saying the same thing. What if we work together? What if all of these committees across all of these professional societies put our heads together and say, let's work together on this really hard, challenging problem? What could we do? What could we do together? And so we did. We wrote a grant. We brought a bunch of people down to the National Institute for Mathematical and Biological Synthesis in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we said, how do we do this? How do we work together? Major heads of professional societies, Ecological Society of America, Botanical Society of America, math people, biology people, all sorts. And that turned into a broader NSF Ideas Lab grant, which produced QUBES Hub. So QUBES Hub was a vision that we would not just work together to do more workshops at more society meetings that were only open to those people who were able to come to society meetings, but that we would also do more to bring the rest of the world into this conversation. And one of the things we felt we needed to do was build a virtual infrastructure to allow everybody who wanted access to quantitative skills and tools to be able to get them. And that means instructors, but that also means students. So we have now 40 cloud-based software tools free to run for students hosted through our website. We now run our faculty mentoring network. Some of them start in person, but actually we run these virtual professional development sessions that span the course of a whole semester that take instructors virtually through with a cohort of other instructors through implementing some new thing in their class. And again, you can do it from anywhere. In this last year, we served over 200 faculty to incorporate new quantitative techniques into their classroom. So this is what we were doing together, finally. But early in our stages, we didn't know all the answers. We didn't know how to do this the best way. And so one of the things we did early is we went back to NIMBIOS, where we had our initial meeting, and we said, okay, here's a big challenge we want to work on. So the challenge was, we know we want to help people across teach these quantitative skills throughout the biology curriculum and help mathematicians teach more authentic biology in their classes. So how do we do that? What are the best practices? So we got this phenomenal group together, and we met 3 times over the span of 2 years, and we just talked about what is the best practice here. And I'm going to ask you the same question, okay? Because I think we have enough people here, and I think you all come from very different and unique backgrounds. So I'm going to ask you the question: what is a model? Because I was just throwing that word out. I didn't define it. What is a model? Now think about it for a second. If you have a paper, you could write it down. You could draw a picture if you want. You have the back of a donation card. You can donate and then draw your picture. What does it mean to you? Well, I'm going to have you go to the neighbor. I had to do my 30 seconds of silence. That was, my instructor thing. Y'all are in my class right now. Okay, so talk to a neighbor. What did you think of? And don't be shy. Tell them honestly. The first thing that came to your mind, I said model. You said.
And I stand corrected. we need to use the mic as we are being live streamed. So please raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you.
Okay, so before we share, just quick question. Was anybody surprised about what the person next to them thought of first? Who was surprised? No one was surprised in here. Everybody had psychic connections with their neighbors, and they thought of the exact same thing at the exact same time? Yeah? Okay, so you both had the same. You were both on the same wavelength. What did you think of? A model car, a toy. I'm just repeating so that you don't have to run around with the microphone. A model car, a toy. This wonderful couple here said they were on the same wavelength. Model toy, model car. Anybody else? A set of relationships. Was that very different or similar to what your neighbor said? Oh, so your neighbor said equations, and you characterize a set of relationships, which very similar but different. Equations, relationships sounds very different than model car, right? and it's very interesting because I'm not going to disparage either of those as things that come to your mind as a model, right? I mean, after a little bit of prodding, when I do this with my students, inevitably somebody admits that they were thinking of a fashion model, right? Nobody wants to admit that first, but somebody in this room was thinking that. And you know, believe it or not, it took us about a year to agree on what a model was. I know this sounds silly, but we very quickly zeroed in that language was an important part of what was going on in terms of our collaboration. We were not speaking the same, we were speaking the same word. We were not meaning the same thing. And those language barriers are indicators of broader, larger barriers. So we started digging in a little bit. This is work supported by other physics education, for example, has delved into this. This is not new recognition. But those barriers led to immediately discussions about bigger feelings of marginalization in one's field. And what I'll mean is that when we started really digging down, we started sharing stories. And we started sharing stories of, I remember this one time I went to, this college and I gave an interview and then somebody talked to me and said, hey, you're a mathematician, I have data. And I said, oh, I don't use data. Like, I'm a mathematician, I don't do that. And then the conversation was over. And then I say, years later, I think about that conversation. How could I have handled that conversation differently? That I did not stop that at that moment because that person misunderstood what I do. What it was is this person was saying, I think I have something that I can connect with you. And I said, I don't want that, right? And that has haunted me for a long time. So then and then another person shared, well, when I was hired as a bioinformatician in my department, it was a hot cutting edge field. And then I had my first pre-tenure review and they said I wasn't doing real science because I didn't have a hypothesis first. So what she was doing, she was working with these large data sets generated through genome sequencing and making insights across enormous amounts of data, but she didn't generate a hypothesis first. Her insights came later. Therefore, she was not doing science. And these are language issues, but they're bigger. They are disciplinary microaggressions. They're broader microaggressions that make it impossible for us to really do truly collaborative work across the disciplines. Our scientific constructs are not necessarily independent of our social constructs. And we need inclusive language and frameworks in order to truly innovate. They're all models. Everything that we mention, everything that comes to our heads, that probably was an association that each one of you made, they're all models. My model's not better than your model. They're just a different way of viewing the world, and it's a different place where you go to first, and that's okay. That should be considered a strength if one person works really well thinking about data, and another person thinks about writing equations first. It's just different, but neither is better or more valid than the other. So in an attempt to try to express and try to find what could be this framework that we all worked with together so that we would understand each other better, we worked with this rule of 5, which is to define a model as a simplified abstract representation of reality for some purpose. It's not a perfect representation. It can have many forms. So it could be something that's, experiential maybe, or verbal. We think something's going on, we come up with an explanation for it. We might then, in an experiential way, go to a lab, set up some kind of way of testing, or maybe some kind of computer simulation for testing it. Then we might generate some data. These are all just different representations of the same model idea. And I think there's a lot of power in this, not just in terms of acknowledging what each other is bringing to the table as equally valid constructs to attack the problem, but as key to attacking the problem. And what I mean by that is that we pulled from the parable and the elephant, which says that if there are people with blindfolds on next to an elephant and they're each touching different parts of the elephant, the person that is standing next to the tail and touching the tail might think he's standing next to a rope, and the person that's standing next to the leg might think he's touching a tree, because he only has that piece of information. But when we work together with all of those different representations, we see that there's an elephant there, even if we are only using our method to investigate, because we're working together on the problem. And then what's really nice about this is when we bring it back out of philosophy and we think about what it means and what it looks like to enact in science, we start thinking that different approaches to science are different walks through the pathway. It doesn't matter if you start with data first and then develop your hypothesis. It doesn't matter if you pass through that mathematical modeling box or not on your way, but you're part of elucidating more information about your system and more insight, whatever you do and whatever the way that you think about the problem and attack the problem. And we're all modelers. We need to all embrace that. We need to all work together to solve these problems, and no pathway is better than the other. Okay. So I'm going to skip a little bit to the next thing. So I've been working in this interdisciplinary education for a while now. I've been thinking about inclusive frameworks, and I moved to Bates. So Bates College, what attracted me was that they said, we want you to come and help us build a new program, one that takes interdisciplinarity an extra step. You know, you have experience in interdisciplinary education, but we also want to make sure that our programs are inclusive, that they're really open to everyone who wants to participate, and they're relevant for today's world. What does that mean? What does that look like? And so it's a new imagining of the future beyond interdisciplinary alone. And so some of the questions we asked ourselves: who are we shaping this program for? What conversations do we need to have, and who needs to be in the room for those conversations? On a systems level, feedback loops can play on existing inequalities. How can we intentionally build a program around our shared values, knowing that we have to work against these feedback loops? And who is the community that needs to understand our computational future the most? Now, some of that involved individual curriculum building. This is a little bit of my advertisement for my talk tomorrow. So if you were here to listen to Calling Bull, you have to come back tomorrow. But Calling Bull is some work that I did based off of a course that Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West at the University of Washington developed. They, after the election, decided that we needed to do a little bit more work with information literacy among our students. And they developed an entire course called Calling Bull. You can get it on callingbull.org. And they have YouTube videos, they have suggested readings, they have a whole syllabus on their website. It's phenomenal. What I did is I used this as a vehicle for getting students to engage in computational work by using R. So it's a programming language. You can use it to do a little data analysis. You can play around with it to get some better visualizations. And so we would do a little bit of that alongside saying, well, why do we want to do this? What do we want to know about the problems around us? What do we want to know about misleading graphics, and could we do better? So I just added a little something extra to this. But that's for tomorrow. So I want to talk instead about the kinds of communities that are doing this work. So part of my role in QUBES, and I work with a wonderful co-PI director team. Part of my role is as consortium director, so I think about partnerships. I think about bringing people together all the time. And on behalf of QUBES, I partnered with NEON, the National Ecological Observatory Network, Software Carpentries, Ecological Society of America, and several other folks. And we got some money from NSF Includes, which focuses on bringing underrepresented folks into STEM education. And we held a meeting of the Environmental Data Science Inclusion Network called EDSIN. They met in Boulder, Colorado this past April. I taught a class on digital community organizing, and my class live tweeted the whole conference. It was also live streamed in addition. So we were really trying to, we only had so many people that we could physically bring to the conference. We wanted to make sure that it was absolutely open from the very beginning. Anybody who wanted to join could join and be a part of the conversation. And so again, I asked, well, that community data science education, when you think about who they are and what they look like, who are you thinking about? I mean, this was our community, and they were phenomenal, just phenomenal. Just great group of people. Lots of Sacknistas in there too. I think Mike recognizes a couple. We had somebody who was important in writing a national data science education report for the National Academies of Science, and he stood up and he said, if the authors had been in this room, our report would have looked different. And I want you to think about what that means in terms of how we are shaping data science education moving forward. Again, coming back to those same questions. Who's in the room? Who does the knowledge of data science disproportionately impact? Who are we allowing to have access to this career? And one of the things also we did is we said, you're the experts in the room. People that organize it, we're just the people that, have the grants and the influence to get the grants. The people in the room, those are the people that really are in the trenches and know what to ask. So what do we ask? And some of those questions were, what does the intersection of environmental justice and data science ethics look like in a world of big data? How do we demonstrate the relevance and importance of environmental science and data science to our communities that we live in and are embedded in? How do we measure diversity? I mean, how could we even demonstrate with metrics that we're diverse? What does that even mean? And at the conclusion of this conference, I sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to write all the things that I think were powerful moments for me as an educator, from the educator perspective, what I need to go back into the classroom and make sure that I am doing. And then I sent it around to a lot of the other folks on Twitter who were part of the online liveliness of this conference and got more feedback and changed some things. And this is the result. So data science education for biology in the future should acknowledge data are power, but not the only way of knowing. It should include ethics and social justice throughout the curriculum. It should embody inclusive design, meaning universal design and inclusive pedagogy, including evidence-based teaching pedagogies and a rehumanizing curriculum. It should focus on access and equity, open data, open and reproducible science, open software, and open educational resources. It should seek to close the data divide, the have and have-nots of data. Remember that data are not neutral, nor are the algorithms trained on those data. And at the same time, respect data ownership, rights, and sovereignty. And at the end of this conference, we wanted to continue to have that conversation, and so I recruited, along with Edson, a group of open education community fellows to try to build a community conversation so that this wouldn't get dropped. And so you can find this conversation on builds.qubeshub.org, BUILD standing for Biological, Universal, and Inclusive Learning in Data Science, which is a community for the exchange of ideas and resources supporting biological and environmental data science education grounded in the practices of universal design for learning and inclusive pedagogy. Meaning that we wanted to create an educational space that really paid attention to who we want in that space. And we recruited a wonderful group of open education fellows to really put our heads around what is our commitment? Do we want to just make this a data science discussion group and kind of slide diversity and universal design in there? What do we need? And we all decided at the end of the day, what we needed is we needed a community that was positive and excited about change in inclusive pedagogy and in universal design and working with our communities and all of these fundamentals. We wanted that to be up front and centered so that we knew that there was a community that worked for us. And this is actually fairly new. It just launched about 2 weeks ago. Okay, I'm going to try to go a little faster because I'm running out of time. Last but not least, I want to talk about what it means to rehumanize the curriculum. And I already kind of hinted towards this when we were talking about data science, but I want to talk about rehumanizing mathematics. This language comes from a professor called Rochelle Gutierrez. So she's in Illinois. And rehumanizing mathematics, or living mathematics, is to work to acknowledge and remove the ways that individuals are marginalized in mathematics, and to affirm and welcome existing knowledge, strengths, and ways of knowing and identities, and use these voices and perspectives to advance our work. Specifically, what we're doing is talking here, this next project is talking specifically about mathematics. So we want those diverse voices, bring those strengths to enhance our mathematical community and to gain more innovation through that. This is a broad digital project. It spawned out of a group that I did not create, that is a Facebook group called Math Mamas, but we decided that we wanted to add a narrative component. And originally the idea came, we should do a book. But it quickly blossomed a little bit more from there, and we ended up focusing primarily on open outlets. So we worked with the Association for Women in Mathematics on their website to put profiles of mathematicians who also happen to be mothers on the website. We worked with the American Mathematical Society. Now there's a devoted blog just to share stories from mothers, mathematicians who happen to be mothers. And in addition, we released a special issue with the Journal of Humanistic Mathematics that focus on a variety of not only personal stories, but also research and poetry and other forms of expression around the challenges of balancing careers in mathematics and academia and as mothers. We also have a session at the joint mathematics meeting this coming January to also continue the story. But the goal of this is that storytelling is critical for changing perceptions about what is and what can be. And we wanted to tell a new story about the role of motherhood in the academy, meaning that several of us felt like, well, we can't pursue a PhD because, we want to have a family or something like that. And that was a false dichotomy. I think we see that now, but that's not the dominant storyline. And so what we wanted to do is raise non-dominant voices in the dialogue here. And we did this in a variety of ways. We did this in humorous ways and in serious ways. So the compendium in the Journal of Humanistic Mathematics includes light things like, Sebastian told me that he only had 2 slices of plain bread for lunch. Like, the mom totally forgot to put peanut butter and jelly in the sandwich that morning, and it happens, right? And it's this comical story called Peanut Butter and Jelly by Elizabeth Gross. It's just absolutely hilarious. And it also included really serious confrontational things. For example, On Contradiction by Piper Heron. Anyone who is against oppression needs to stop using those with the fewest burdens as the standard bearers. Right? So serious words alongside jovial words, but all needing to be heard. So my contribution to this, and I thought about this, and I decided, I happened to be on sabbatical at the same time, and my father was planning a trip back to Peru. It was only the second time he'd been back since he immigrated in the 60s. And big family trip back, and he said, you should totally write a story about your, this person, great mathematician, and you should work with, this person. He was like trying to set me up on a research project during my sabbatical. I didn't realize that my dad was supposed to do that, but this is what Latino dads do apparently. And so I was like, okay. So I went back to Peru, and I started doing a little bit of research into a woman named Luz. And so here's the story that had sort of started this. A nun from Maria Auxiliadora in Huancayo went to Papa Albino and asked why his little daughters were not attending school. And he said that they did not have money. So the nun told him, you don't need to have money. You don't have to pay. Just take them to school. And when the day came, the 3 little girls did not show up. The nun went back to Papa Albino's house and talked to Mama Bella. And she told the nun they did not have decent clothes to go to school. So the nun went back to the convent and got the clothes they needed, went to get the girls dressed, and into school. Our mom and her sisters were always grateful to Jesus for watching over them, and that nun for giving them the opportunity. So it's kind of this intriguing story that starts out with this sort of offer of an education by this nun to these 3 little girls who were washing clothes in the middle of sort of going from house to house at the age 4, 5, and 6 or something like this, getting a little extra money because their dad had been in a mining accident and had lost his arm. So we're talking, the 3 girls in this story are Luz, Alicia, and Hortensia. This happened in about 1922. Sor Bruno established a school in Huancayo, Peru. And at age 15, so only a few years, 10 years after this offer of an education, Luz was already substitute teaching mathematics at this school. And they say she was always excited when they called her in to teach because it was something she loved to do from the very beginning. By 18, she worked as a mathematics teacher full-time. She got married. She had 8 children. And then she also decided to go back and get her PhD. So she went to the Universidad de San Marcos, which is the oldest university in all of the Americas. And she graduated in 1961. Just to give you a sense of sort of what it was like to go to the University of San Marcos in the 60s, in the time of intellectual liberation, right? One famous director of the university, Rodriguez de Mendoza, believed in productive and free intellectual debate, and he believed that the path to liberation was through education. Very Ferrer philosophy. And once she had her PhD, she became the chair of her department, and then she became the academic dean of the school in 1966. In 1969, she became the superintendent of all of the schools in Lima. So this is like the equivalent of being like in charge of all the schools in DC or New York City. Unfortunately, her husband's health started to deteriorate in the mid-70s, and she retired. In 1977, she was awarded the Pumas Magisteriales Award, which is the most prestigious award for teaching in the country. So we have an equivalent here, the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching award. So she received that award. And unfortunately, her husband passed away shortly after, and she immigrated to California. And 20 years later, she was still so influential, what she had given to her community, that she was awarded an exemplary service and devotion diploma, again, 20 years later, still recognized for her contributions. And Luz had two daughters that became math majors and later math teachers, Maria and Luz. And Maria also immigrated to, she was the first to immigrate to California. She went to Cal State Fullerton. And she had a daughter named Luz. So now we're talking about Luz's granddaughter, who she went to UC Irvine, and she became a mathematics teacher. So several generations, still the influence now has led all the way into the Northern Hemisphere, and it's influencing mathematics education in the United States, so much so that she became a presidential award winner for science and mathematics for the state of Arizona. So we're talking now about a legacy that has transcended continents and time, and it's not the typical narrative of immigrants in the United States. The youngest, Hortensia, also became a teacher. And Alicia started the college, did go to college at the end as well. She started as a biology major, switched to mathematics. She married, had 9 children, immigrated to the US, and became a chemist. She had several children that pursued mathematics and computer science. One of them was Hugo Diaz, who was my dad. And I became a mathematician. Started as a biology major, switched to mathematics, I don't know, something genetic. But the point is that it was important to know our stories. And I don't want to say that, oh, well, the colonized education will save us all and it'll make all this better, system of education and math, and it's a beautiful story. I think there are 2 storylines instead that I want to elevate. One is that this is not the story about what immigration and immigrants look like right now. That's not the dialogue that's going up, and I want to present a different storyline. The second is that I went back a little further than this, because my time in Peru, I understood looking around that the Incan were just phenomenal civil engineers. They were phenomenal. And it turns out that I come from a family, I'm the weirdo, the mathematician. My other siblings are all civil engineers. There are 2 kinds of civil engineering that the Incans did particularly well in. The first is water engineering, and they're still rediscovering ancient water reclamation techniques used now for use in now near drought conditions in Peru. The second thing they were really good at is earthquake engineering. phenomenal earthquake engineering and rediscovering, again, same techniques used in these structures. And I have a sister that's a water engineer and one that's an earthquake engineer, so it's kind of funny. The other thing I'll point out is that this is the Temple of the Sun. You'll notice that it looks like there's different stone, and that's an indicator of some of the colonizer stone that's on here. And so when the Spanish came, they took the gold off the top of all of the tops of the buildings, and then they did some exterior walls and some walls on top that were in the Spanish style. And when the first big earthquake came, all of the Spanish architecture fell down and the Incan remained. And I want to think about that as an analogy for the foundations that we build our own educational system on. And are we paying attention to the assets that are there? Or are we trying to build over something in something that looks better, but ignores something important about who we're working with? So I went through this like humorous like thing when I give a talk at the beer conference, and Chris thought it was funny. I said, okay, well I'll do this really quickly, but I know I'm running out of time. So these are my wizard's rules. You remember this, Chris? But I'm going to call it for a community-centered academia. And the first is don't reinvent the wheel, join forces, and reinvent transportation. And second is found ideas deserve to be praised, shared, and credited. It'll always come back if you give the time. If everyone keeps saying it should be done, it's an invitation to lead. Who a mathematician is or a scientist is up to you to define, however that looks. I made some joke about my Darth Vader shoes or whatever, but I'm wearing Pumas today, so it looks like Pumas today. Wizard's fifth rule, don't forget to play, imagine, and feed your soul. If you want to humanize academia, don't forget. And last, and this one's one I added after I was making the presentation for today. I can't believe I didn't put it on there before. All of you have passions and strengths. Your communities have passions and strengths. Shape these into the tools for the work ahead. Thank you.
This is very specific. I'm an anthropologist, and when you talked about the Inca Connection, something that fascinated me at one time when I learned about it was the quipu, you know, the knotted strings.
I'll put the picture up so that others can see what that looks like.
I thought you had one in there, but is there any story you've discovered about those as mathematical data collection
Yeah, it's
devices?
interesting because acknowledging that is part of early data collection, right? And keeping track of early data. This is the start of big data, right? And acknowledging that existed. So he's talking about this knotted, you can kind of see it in the second row. That's a quipu. You know, and I taught computer science last semester when I started talking about computing, early computing and numbers that I had them read some background on quipu. Yeah.
So that is a topic of study for
mathematics. I have it in my curriculum.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you.
No, thanks for bringing it up and recognizing it.
Thanks, Carrie. Great talk. I have a question because I mentor students in my lab, and I try to be inclusive. although over 20 years, I've probably had 99% women in my lab. And I don't know if I purposely select women because I like to mentor the women, or that maybe men don't feel comfortable coming to my lab because I am a woman, or I mentor historically women. And it's in relation to your math mamas. In having a very exclusive group, do you feel you're somewhat not being inclusive?
You know, it's interesting when we put in the proposal for the American Mathematical Society blog, and we said, they came back and they asked us a very similar question. And I said that, we're open to things, but at the core, we want to raise stories that aren't raised. And there are a lot of other folks who do great work and have platforms for those other things, and there just wasn't a platform for this. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. That's a false dichotomy, but each of us do different parts to make the system work better together. And if this is a part that I can play to help elevate those voices, that's what I'm going to do, because that part is the part that does not exist yet. So I think it's okay. And I think it's good that people like you have the capacity and success to do that.
So if there are no more questions, let's call it a day. And don't forget to come to Carrie's talk tomorrow. It promises to be interesting, and bring your friends along. Maybe bring some kids along as well. They can learn something.
If I see any kids, I won't say bullshit. I'll just keep it full.
Okay, okay. All right, let's thank our speaker. Yeah, you got a question? The talk is at 7 p.m. and it's going to be in the lecture hall at the end of the building over here. And the title of the talk is she's going to talk about her course called Calling Bull with R, and more. Yeah. Right. Let's thank our speaker.